In the next few minutes, I'd like to reflect upon what I've seen over the last 10.5 months. It's been a huge privilege being the High Sheriff of this wonderful county of Suffolk. Wherever my wife and I have travelled, across the breadth of the county, whether it's with the police, with probation, in the courts, the fire service, the prisons, or to one of the great businesses of this county, or to the various tentacles of the county council, or to the myriad of charities and community organisations we've visited, people have been unfailingly kind to us, have opened their doors, answered all our sometimes silly questions, and told us all. I'm often asked what I've learned and what has surprised. Well, there have been serious discoveries, like finding out that 42 in every 100 containers going in and out of this country go through Felixstowe. That basically means that the UK trade, as nearly everything goes on a container these days. So Suffolk truly is the gateway to the world. And indeed that Ipswich, as befits a fine agricultural county, has the #1 agricultural exports port in the country. Agriculture, tourism, food, technology, renewable energy, much more besides. Suffolk PLC has a bright future. But it's the unlikely that surprises. Did you know that 20 million pieces of sushi issue forth from Suffolk each year, made by Ichiban in the lee of the church tower in Earl Stonham? That the world-renowned Winsor & Newton sable paintbrushes are fashioned from the fur of male Siberian weasel tails, trapped in Russia, but handcrafted into brushes in, you guessed it, Lowestoft. And, damagingly for my waistline, that the best salted caramels in the world are handmade by bee chocolates on a farm near Orford. I could go on in that vein. What I found that is relevance to this evening, when people think of Suffolk, they tend to think of our magnificent world churches, our beautiful market towns, our big skies, our marshes, and so on. And we'll celebrate this evening some of the heroes who look after that heritage for us. But it's all too easy to pass unaware that underneath the surface, Suffolk has its full share of the full panoply of societal problems. Poverty, family breakdown, loneliness, homelessness, drugs, domestic child abuse, low self-esteem, entrenched state dependency, with an oversubscribed and creaking NHS and a police force stretched to the limits trying to cope with some of the consequences. Some of the old people in this county don't speak to a neighbour, friend or family member in over a month, 15,000 of them to be precise. 83,000 people in Suffolk live below the poverty line, including 19,000 children. Food bank parcel issues from the Waveney Food Bank on a like-for-like basis are up 80% versus a year ago. And we have homeless, often unnoticed, on our streets, even in my small local town of Sudbury. But somehow numbers don't quite convey the raw reality. When I grew up in Suffolk, we were collectively, materially, much poorer, more insular, but I think less selfish, less materialistic, and much more community-minded. Since then, on the credit side, we've become much more affluent, we have more diversity, and in some arenas, more tolerance. But on the debit side, Suffolk has by no means escaped the national picture of a widespread breakdown in traditional family structures, and all too often of the most basic parenting skills. Nor have we escaped the growing me culture, and the phenomenon of people living disconnected from normal human discourse in an e-world of screens, on what I call the not-so-social media. And depressingly, we have the stubborn failure of wealth and opportunity to trickle down to the more marginalised in our society. We have far too many children in our society who have no role models, who suffer from intergenerational learned behaviours of low expectation, and who feel they have little, if anything, to lose. Layer on top of that the hideous exploitation of the weakest by the county lines Class A drugs dealers, and we get the young people who all too often I've seen at the sharp end with the police, with the probation, in our courts, and I fear in our prisons. The journey from low attainment and aspiration to the superficially glamorous world of drug raps, rocks, and gangs is all too easy. And breaking the cycle of poverty of purse and poverty of aspiration is much tougher than it sounds. Sadly, when you're face to face with the sharp end of social ills that walk the streets of all our communities, whether they be in Lowestoft or Leiston, or indeed leafy Bury St Edmunds or sleepy Saxmundham, you see the full unintended consequences of the age of austerity, with rising demand on local services, whilst for decades central politicians of all colours have quietly pared away at local funding, with the inevitable manifestation being the disappearance of a whole plethora of social services that used to exist. When I go to see the Level 2 youth charity in Felixstowe, who used to help young children from chaotic and vulnerable families, I hear that the council used to run 3 youth centres in and around the town and 3 mother and baby units funded by the council. They simply don't exist today. So those working in the arms of the Voluntary Sector that do remain make a sterling job of it. But now a growing share of the burden has to fall fair and square on the charitable sector. And sadly, the same downward pressure on local government funding also means the council can never give the voluntary sector the money it deserves and needs. So bar the occasional gracious but unreliable and hard to count on gift from the lottery, it's down to the community, to the private sector, and to all of us to do our bit to help bridge the financial gap. If my tale has been downbeat so far, that is, of course, but half the story. My hope rests on the wonderful work that I've seen our volunteers and our voluntary sector to be capable of. Wherever we've been, we've unearthed another remarkable troop of cheerful volunteers, whether manning our lifeboats, astride our fire engines as retained firefighters, on the beat as specials, or out in the marshes as guides and helpers for the Suffolk Wildlife Trust. Then there are all those Samaritans manning the phones at the night, the cathedral choir boys struggling into rehearsal before school, or the volunteer ladies from Homestart visiting first-time mothers to help get them set right. Not to mention St John's, the Scouts, the police cadets, and dozens of village good neighbour schemes helping address the needs of the elderly and the lonely. And I could give 100 more examples. Often it's the same volunteers popping up in all kinds of roles, whether it's Sue from Mendlesham, who I've met in the Ipswich night shelter one night, and then the next day you find her singing her heart out in pop chorus to raise money for the hospice on the next. Or last week, Teresa, Kendra and Joanne from the Christopher Centre in Sudbury, manning the community depot one day and then cooking in the community kitchen the next. Of course, most organisations and charities need to support these volunteers with a backbone of paid professionals, but the combination is a winning formula. And if we are to expand the voluntary sector to take up the slack as the state downsizes, we also need to play smart. We need to tap into Suffolk's capacity for non-politicised teamwork, to draw on our ingrained local bent for compassion, and to unleash the public spiritness of our young. Suffolk is famously understated, friendly place with a long tradition of working together to face up to challenges. I've come together brilliant examples of statutory, private and voluntary sectors working together, arm in arm, none better than the remarkable Lowestoft Rising Network. I heard of many great examples of Team Suffolk on June the 21st, on our first Suffolk Day, which Mark Murphy so brilliantly created. And we'll hear other examples later. Compassion we've seen everywhere. From the custody sergeant sitting beside a drugged-out offender in a cell in the Martlesham Pick, to a 60-year-old retiree grand mentor, sitting having coffee with a care home girl who never had a real granny. And we've seen the help become the helpers, whether those help from debt or addiction or young people volunteering who were themselves helped onto the right road by the charity they now serve. I believe the young are even more conscious of their community responsibilities than we were in our day. Again, we'll hear examples later of what our young people can contribute. So yes, I emerged from my year as High Sheriff concerned that we have a growing army of elderly people who risk not being given the good neighbourly support they've earned and deserve, and that far too many of our children are not being given the start in life they deserve and not leaving school with the self-esteem that they need to get on in life. But hopeful because of those special Suffolk qualities and the very special nature of our voluntary sector. Which all leads me to say in conclusion that we can go a huge way to solving the problems in our midst if we all put our arms to the wheel to help that voluntary sector. So in conclusion, I'd ask you to do two things. When you leave, you get a goodie bag, and in your goodie bag you will find 2 copies of the High Sheriff's Legacy leaflet, one for you and one for a generous-minded friend. I'm hoping that we will all make the effort to add to your will a legacy, big or small, to a Suffolk charity, and if you're not sure to which one, to the Suffolk Community Foundation, who can channel it for you to the areas you want to support. It's a disturbing fact that 78% of the money we do give in Suffolk leaves this county to the big national and international charities, and it leaves on a fast horse and rides back on a hobbled mule in a small order. So let's all do our bit to help bridge the funding gap today and in the decades ahead by leaving legacies. The tax breaks mean you can be hugely generous without having materially diluting what your beneficiaries receive. So do please read the leaflet. Secondly, many of you, even most of you here, work for charities or work as trustees or volunteer in one way or another. But could we all not do just that little bit more? Maybe join or start a local good neighbour scheme, give a night a month to the winter night shelter, join the Samaritans, or participate in the work of the charity closest to our heart. As I heard Charles Kroll, the good minister of the United Reformed Church in Southwold, encourage us last year, we should all volunteer for 3 reasons. It's good for the community, it's good for you, and it makes God smile. Thank you for listening, and a special thank you to all of those who in recent months have welcomed my wife and I and helped educate me. Anyway, enough of me. Let the awards begin. Thank you.